Hey Aprupa, welcome to the session. Hi Lavish. Hi everyone. Hi guys, keep joining. We are starting our session in just a minute. Hey Tanya.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay.
Hi. Yeah. How are you?
Well, how are you doing?
I'm good too.
Yeah.
So guys, those who have joined right now, I should tell you that it is another session of EDSI Women of the Month, and joining us today is Aprupa, sexuality educator. You might have seen her educating people on Instagram, posting reels around sexual and reproductive health. And today's session will be about breaking taboos and busting myths around sex. So let's start the chat. So,
Absolutely.
Aprupa, my first question to you is, yeah. So, what inspired you to be a sexuality educator?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think even outside of Instagram, this is what I do with my life. I work with a brilliant youth-led, youth-focused organization called the YP Foundation, and I work on the sexual and reproductive health rights and justice work that we do there, working with 5,000 adolescents, young people, parents, educators, policymakers, cultural and religious leaders across 4 states in India. So this is what I do with my entire life outside of Instagram as well. And what inspired me was just like lack of information and conversation around sex, sexuality, safety, affirming, pleasure-centric information, queer trans-affirmative information around these topics for me personally growing up. And I say this very often, but I think I put myself in rather dangerous situations, trying to just explore, like healthily explore my own sexuality and my own body, which I feel like if I had the right information at the right age, I would have been in a better position to make informed decisions. And that is what inspires me. Like I want to speak to the younger me, people like me, but younger, and be able to provide them with the right information, access to services, and also like build their capacity so that they can advocate for themselves. Like they're more than capable.
Yeah.
I mean, Gen Z, big fan, right?
Yeah.
I think more than capable of advocating for rights. So yeah, that's sort of what inspires me to be a sex educator.
So, what you just said, that there's a lack of education and awareness around sex and reproductive health, right? So, since kids in India do not have access to such tools, they often, try to learn about adults, and there are certain pros and cons of it. So, could you please elaborate about them for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very interesting question, and I'm so glad that you asked about both pros and cons, which is it's important for us to acknowledge both, right? And the biggest sex educator, unfortunately, across the world is porn at this point of time, and the kind of reach that porn has and porn websites have, sex educators don't have. Even the biggest organizations in the world don't have that type of reach, and also like percolation across different strata of the society. So yes, all of us are watching porn or have been curious about porn, right? And I don't necessarily feel like it's a bad or good thing. What definitely needs to happen though is that we do need to educate ourselves and younger people about the reality behind porn. Because porn isn't just what you're seeing on the screen. There is a whole gamut of ethics behind it, in the sense that the mainstream porn that we see is exploitative. We know that the working conditions are not necessarily the safest for the actors themselves. We also know that, there is trafficking that also happens. Having said that, there is also ethical porn that is available and which is paid, which has better working conditions for the actors themselves, which also shows you different types of sex, different bodies, which also shows you, consent practices, safer sex practices, using condoms and dental dams. I mean, there exists like a whole spectrum of like the difficulty with that often becomes is how do you find and sift through all of this to find the right kind of maybe video for yourself. And especially like if you're younger and you don't have access to a lot of like money or financial independence, then you may not actually be able to purchase ethical porn either. So in that context, like we do need to have open and honest conversations about porn and its impact and the reality behind it. And also like conversations around, you know, how as like maybe slightly older people, like I'm 30 now, right? Like can me and my friend share a subscription, like we would share a Netflix subscription? Can we have like open conversations around that? It's easier said than done because sex is still such a taboo in our country. You know, we may even with our friends, we still talk about like sex experiences vaguely, but we may not necessarily talk about self-pleasure, for instance. A lot of us might not even have the privacy to explore our own body. So, you know, in that context, like, you know, of course that exists. And then there is also like mainstream cinema, web series, you know, where like more explicit scenes and also just more types of relationships are being depicted. While this is a welcome move, I think it's also important for us to be able to, again, like, especially with adolescents, very important for adults who are invested in their healthy development to become cognizant about the changing reality of like adolescents and young people, and to also be able to open those doors of conversations with them.
My next question to you is, so, you know, most people think that sex education is just about sex and pleasure, but it's also about understanding your body and understanding when, you know, understanding about violence as well. So what is your take on it?
Absolutely. So, which is why I call myself a sexuality educator, because what I work on is comprehensive sexuality education and not just sex education. I mean, these are all just terminology, but the difference between the two would be that with sex education, there is like a higher emphasis and focus on the biology of things, right? Like changes that happen to the body, certain processes, protections that one can use, and so on. Whereas with comprehensive sexuality education, we focus on the entire human experience, which includes relationships, which includes body image, which includes cultural and religious implications, you know, of living in this world and as a young person. It also includes access to services. It is from a rights-based perspective. And comprehensive sexuality education is just a talk on sex and pleasure. While a talk on sex and pleasure is extremely important. Like, if nothing else, at least give a talk on sex and pleasure, right? Like I would say that is the bare minimum. But of course, like, it goes way beyond that. It touches upon aspects of like even being able to recognize red flags in a relationship. How do you negotiate in romantic relationships? I mean, I like to say that we are first generators, many of us, right? Like, our parents often than not are heterosexual, and they've also been in possibly like arranged marriages, many of our parents, right? And even if not, they're probably the first people that they're the first generation that's probably actively dating and seeing multiple people and exploring their sexuality like that. So in that context, we also don't have too many role models per se in our lives.
Right.
For marriage, we still have like examples of like good relationships from that perspective. But how about like a casual relationship? When casual relationship, what are you being casual and out, right? Even in a casual relationship, there are two people in a situationship, a delusionship. There are people in and emotions involved. So how can, you know, we first capacitate ourselves to take care of our own emotions, to regulate our own emotions? What are the tools that are available at our disposal? And also, how do we co-regulate in while dating or being in relationships with other people? So comprehensive sexuality education is way beyond that. And also, you know, things like some religions might frown upon non-marital sex, or they might frown upon masturbation, even self-pleasure even. So in that context, if you're exploring your body and you're experiencing shame, if you're experiencing guilt, how do you reconcile the two? Right? Because those two parts of you can still coexist. You might be going to mandir one day and might be wanting to masturbate that night. Like, how do you bridge the dichotomy of all of this? And as humans, we're complex beings. We contain multitudes within ourselves. So I believe that comprehensive sexuality education really gives you the information and the tools to be able to process all these emotions, to regulate our emotions, to effectively communicate our needs and desires, and to also like be able to understand other people's needs and desires. And it also talks about rejection. How does one reject with empathy? Let somebody down in a way that is not harmful to them. And how does one also receive a rejection? That's not something that we're taught either. It talks about boundaries. So I'd say that it's an important life skill that we need to have access to. Just like we need to have access to, life skills like being able to cook or being able to change the light bulb in the house. It's as simple as that, right? And this is information that you would actually also use. Like I see a lot of jokes, hear a lot of jokes about how, when have we used trigonometry? Sure. I mean, we do, we still use trigonometry, maybe not in like very obvious ways, but sex ed is something that we will use in very obvious ways in our lives. So extremely important to have conversations about the importance of comprehensive sexuality education, and then also like as a society have that collective demand that young people have a right to this information.
Right. So, you just talked about body image, and with adult films or even in a natural space, most women feel conscious. Men, women, everybody feel conscious about certain parts of their body or how they look, how they appear. And especially when it comes to sex, it's, it can be a little daunting on people. So, can it really affect their sex life, or how can it manifest in physical or maybe in terms of mental health?
Yeah, thanks. That's another interesting question. And body image, of course, is something that has to be discussed, and something that also it's a conversation that needs to begin as early as like, as soon as like a child can start understanding their own body. And, the comparison, sort of we hear like, some kids being called cute and some kids being called intelligent. Like typically it's very gendered as well. So body image is like a big part of human experience. And it can definitely show up in the way that we are experiencing intimacy, or the way that we are interacting with our own and other bodies. It also impacts whether or not we think we're deserving of love and pleasure, right? Like it really has an impact so many things in our lives. And we also know that as a culture, there is a lot of like body negativity or body shaming that is very casual and it's so propagated. Like you would meet somebody after a long period of time and they feel entitled almost to comment on your body. You go to a function, somebody will make a comment on, "Arey, moti ho gayi hai, patli ho gayi hai, aisi ho gayi hai, waisi ho gayi hai." That's almost the first thing that people will comment on as soon as they look at you. And not so much, how or like how's your heart been or that kind of thing, right? So it is also like culturally normalized. And even like me personally, I have not necessarily experienced, I have a very, I'd say fairly normative looking body. It's changed and grown with age and so on, but growing up I didn't necessarily hear people make comments about my body, but I heard people make comments about their own body, like the older people in my life, like whether that's or my aunts or teachers and that kind of thing. And I also heard them make comments about other people's bodies. So it put this message in my head that if I am not thin, or if I'm not presenting a certain way, if my body doesn't look a certain way, if I'm too thin, that's also a problem, obviously, right? If I'm not a certain, then I'm not worthy. That is so dehumanizing. How can our worth be tied to the size and shape of our body? How is it okay to comment on a person's worth based on what their body appears like? Does it change who they are as a person? Does it change the abilities that they might have? Does it change the interests that they might have? Like, can we get to know each other on a human level? And can we also refrain from making comments about each other's bodies? And especially in sexual and romantic relationships, like if you're on dating apps, you also hear you also see people write things like no fat people, or like no this kind of people, or people above 6'2" only. Where is this coming from? Why are we also tying, and because like our worth is tied to our bodies, if we are with somebody who does not have good looking body or isn't very conventionally, appearing a certain way, then our worth also goes down because of that. So we also want to be attached to someone with a certain type of body and certain type of appearance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ridiculous. And also in the way that who are we seeing on screen that is worthy of attention and pleasure and joy and comfort and all those good things, and who is the one who's ridiculed, who is the sidekick, right, in the films.
Yeah.
It's always like a bigger person. They're always like the butt of jokes. They're always the punchline. So in such a context, it's very difficult for us to constantly keep saying, Are, apne bare mein acha socho, think good about your body no matter what the world says, right? It's not as simple as that. When these messages are constantly forced, and in such a context, like I love what someone's saying in the comment. They're saying emotional atyachar. Totally, that's what it feels like. And in such a context, like what I would say is available, a tool which is fantastic and which is available to all of us, is body neutrality, wherein we don't attach positive or negative ideals to our body. We don't say that, oh, I love my body despite everything. If you do, good for you. And like, I'm so proud of you for having fought those messages and biases that exist in our society. But body neutrality essentially means that you shift your focus on what your body can do for you. How is your body a vessel for you to experience your life, for you to, have a nice, juicy burger? How are you experiencing your body, right? Like, what are the different parts of your body that you experience it? If you are somebody, for whom humor is a very important value, how are you using your body to express and experience humor and joy in your life? So shifting your focus to what your body can do for you, instead of like what your body looks like, can be a good way for you to also start building that relationship with your body. It's easier said than done, of course, and it's really much like any relationship. Have its highs and lows. There will be days where you'll be feeling fine AF, and there'll be days where you'll be feeling really down in the dumps. Maybe somebody makes a comment, maybe you see something, and then it really triggers you. Remember that it need not be such a linear relationship either. There will be ups and downs, and that's absolutely okay. But can you start focusing a little bit more on how is your body supporting you to live your life, as opposed to what does it in comparison to very Eurocentric standards of beauty, right? Like, I confused. I mean, not to shame again, like the actresses, confused between the actresses because they all look so similar. They're a very certain type of look, which is why when you see a Kunkun Sharma or Nandita Das, you're like, wow, like this is really blowing my mind, because it's another kind of beauty that is at least being represented to relatable. You. Exactly. What are your thoughts on this, Krati? I'm curious.
So, no, I do think that, people are conscious, but I also have spoken to people who have said that, because of their body image issues, they were quite, a little bit inhibited when it came to sex for them. And it took a long time for them to be okay with how they look naked. So that was something that was on my mind. I wanted to pick your brains on that, because it can really affect someone's mental health, or maybe at that moment they can become awkward, or it can manifest physically when they in the intimacy space.
100%. And because like we're also a society that believes that bigger is better and size matters when it comes to like breasts, or when it comes to the penis, or that the vagina is actually supposed to be really tight, or it's supposed to look a certain way and feel a certain way and smell a certain way, and of course it impacts our ability in spaces of intimacy with each other as well. And I feel like if you are somebody who's going through an experience like this, I would say, one, that it doesn't matter the way that your body looks or the way that your body smells. It absolutely does not matter. Your body will still be capable of giving and receiving pleasure. So that is one thing for you to remember. Secondly, you can also go easy on yourself. You can absolutely, if you're more comfortable with the lights turned off, you can have that conversation with your partner and let them know you prefer that the lights be turned off. You can also around what are the body parts that you might be insecure about, and how can your partner engage with your body in a more affirming and trauma-informed way? Like, how can your partner actually support you in this process? If both of you are sort of experiencing body, then it's sort of difficult for you to, it's really hampering your sex life, and it's both of how many ever in a relationship, but it's really hampering the way that you're engaging with each other. Like, continued conversations, as awkward and as difficult as they might be, and especially again because sexual communication is not a skill that we are necessarily taught, it's important to be able to start having those conversations. A good first step is maybe start sharing Instagram posts now. Start sharing reels, start sharing posts that you think are affirming in of like body image, and maybe share it with a partner, and that can spark a conversation which is not directly about your body either. And again, like, you are allowed to pace yourself. You're allowed to go as far as you are comfortable at each given point of time. If right now, you're extremely conscious about a part of your body and you would like to build more trust with your partner before you engage with that part specifically, then you're allowed to set that boundary as well. And I mean, anybody who respects you and respects your boundaries and consent will respect that as well, will respect the fact that this is how far you might want to go. So definitely going to say that yes, it does impact the way that we're able to engage with other people. Also, do we, even before that, do we believe that we deserve pleasure? Do we believe that our bodies touched and felt, and all those good things. It begins with self, and it's not easy. It's not, again, like I said, it's not going to be linear. There will be ups and downs, and it's okay for you to also on a particular day say, actually, can we stop right now, because this experience is triggering for me. Allowed to have those types of negotiations, even if both of you was really into it till that point of time, and you're allowed to withdraw your consent at any point.
Yeah, I think that is something everybody should understand, and even accept that sometimes people they might want to take a step back just because they are there. They might not want to go through the entire process at once. So one of the person just commented, so we shoot us a question and we will try to answer it. And my next question to you is about pleasure and the pleasure gap that we have in India. A couple of years ago, Durex India, they published a study which said that almost 70% of women in India do not experience orgasm every time they have sex. So I understand that orgasm is not the goal of having sex, but there is a huge pleasure gap, and we cannot have a conversation and not address it. So what are your thoughts on it, and what can people do to bridge this gap?
Great question. You must get A+ for all the questions that you've curated today. But okay, so the pleasure gap is basically the disparity in the amount of pleasure that men and women in cis heteronormative relationships, which means a man in a relationship, a cis man in a relationship with a cis woman, with each other. The pleasure gap essentially highlights that it's not the same for like queer men and queer women. It looks different in different relationships. But of course, like even within cis heteronormative relationships, it's important to acknowledge that there exists this huge disparity, which is in fact like even bigger than the wage gap. So definitely need to be talking about the pleasure gap. And so glad that you brought it exists. It exists for multiple reasons, right? One, because a lot of people, a lot of cishet women, a lot of people with female bodies are in fact not able to orgasm through penetration alone. There is a need for clitoral stimulation, an absolute must. And in many positions, in fact, the clitoris is not getting stimulated. So one, to be able to find positions in which the clitoris automatically gets stimulated. And two, to also make clitoral stimulation a part of like the sexual act. Important as a star, seems to become within the sexual act. Remember that sex is anything you want for it to be. It's not just like something going into something and something coming out of something. That's not all that there is to sex. I also don't agree with the term foreplay.
Because I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm really happy that someone actually said it, that most women don't experience pleasure just with penetration, because I feel a lot of women even don't understand that, this is not the way they
Yeah,
might feel pleasurable. It might not be pleasurable.
yeah.
But thank you for saying it. I mean, women who have joined us, or who might see this live session a little later, they would not feel that something was wrong with them. It's just how it happens.
Exactly. It's absolutely how it happens. And also the other thing for you to remember is that in the vagina, or the front hole, the pleasure centers are only in the first 1 to 1.5 inches. Beyond that, there are no pleasure centers. So penetration is not doing much beyond that as well. So for people who are worried about their size,
Yeah.
even a penis that is 2 inches, 2.5 inches through penetration is actually a good size, because it's still hitting the pleasure zones. So it's not ever about the
Mhm.
size. It's always about the technique. It's always about the communication. It's always about holding that space for each other to be able to say, okay, this is working. This is good. This is meh. I don't know. And this is actually bad. I want you
Yeah.
to stop this. To have that space to be able to give that feedback to each other during the act as well is extremely important. And I was just saying, before you shared as to how it's important to talk about how a lot of folks don't orgasm through penetration alone, is basically how I don't agree with this term foreplay. What does foreplay mean? Does that mean that penetration is afterplay? Foreplay, the
Yeah.
entire experience is actually the sexual experience, and sex can even begin, by sending each other a message. It can begin by holding hands and, like,
Mhm.
caressing each other while you are maybe out on a date. Like, there is so much that goes into it, and it lasts long after an act or orgasm. There is aftercare that is extremely important, where you're taking care of each other, you're cuddling, you're having a conversation, you're giving each other a glass of water, as simple,
Yeah.
or passing a
Yeah.
tissue. So it's also extremely
Mhm.
important, and that entire experience is what forms the sexual experience or sex. Right? So very, very important for us to be able to expand our idea of what sex entails in the first place, and what points one needs to hit in order to really experience orgasm. And it's like, we have erogenous zones all over our body. In fact, our entire body can become one big pulsating erogenous zone, touched the right way and felt up the right way, and with the right kind of like conversation, and with maybe the right person. So really to be able to think about that. And the other thing, which you very rightly said, Krati, is orgasm is not the finish line of sex. It is not the only
Mm.
reason why people would have sex. So even if you are somebody who is not so much like experiencing orgasms per se during sex, but you're somebody who's experiencing a lot of pleasure, your sexual experience is still valid, as
Yeah.
long as it's something pleasure, happiness, connection. People also have maintenance sex, in the sense that, like, if one partner really wants to engage and the other partner wants to also maintain the relationship, so to say, or like offer that to their partner, even though they might not be super into it, they're allowed to do that, as long as, like, it's not an abusive relationship and it's actually a consensual, communicative relationship. There are multiple reasons for which people have sex. Maybe they're bored and that's why they're having sex. Maybe they're stressed and that's
Yeah.
why they're having sex. So many reasons. An orgasm does not have to be the finish line. But however, if you are somebody who wants orgasms, who wants to experience orgasms, you're more than entitled to it. Clitoral stimulation and exploring your body, trying different positions, and also like building that kind of emotional safety within the relationship and within the interaction. Again, when I say relationship, it does not have to be a serious long-term relationship. It can be a one-night stand. It can be a hookup. But even hookup, there have to be these elements of safety and communication and that give and take, right? It cannot be just
Yeah.
because it's not serious, you cannot be cavalier about people's emotions and needs.
My last question to you is, you have been a sexuality educator for quite some time. What are the, absurd sex myths that you have heard about?
Great. I've been a sex educator full time for over 5 years now, and it's been an extremely exciting journey. I think I've made several mistakes. I mean, I also feel like I like to call myself a bad feminist, borrowing from Roxane Gay, because I don't feel like, you can be at your practice ever. I constantly learn, BDSM practitioners about consent. I learn from somatic practitioners about how to work with the body when talking about like even something like bodily changes and be cognizant of that. It's a work in progress, and you do need, as a practitioner, you need to constantly challenge yourself and you need to constantly grow. So when I'm talking about the myths, and if you are somebody who subscribes to that, coming from a place of shaming you, coming from a place of like initiating this dialogue on why we, believing in these myths in the first place, right? The biggest myth, of course, according to me, is that sex is penetration, and we've already like spoken about it. Sex is not just penetration. Sex can be penetration also. Like I hear a lot of people, like some people DM me and they're like, but you know what, I like penetration. Great. If that's what you like and if that's what you're into, fantastic. But that's not the only thing. Can you expand? I mean, it's like this, right? If you can get a lottery of 1 crore rupees, why are you settling for a lottery of 10 lakh rupees? Get that 1 crore rupees. Huh? So it's a bit like that. So expand your idea of sex. The second myth is that people in relationships, if they're happy together and if their sex life is good, they will not masturbate, or that they will not use sex toys. And if somebody is using a sex toy in a relationship, it means that there is something wrong with them, right? Like this is a really big myth that also exists. Or they're cheating, with a toy. Can you believe it? Toys are collaborators, not competitors. They are just like any other appliance in the house. Like a mixer grinder can help you make the chutney. It can help you. It's a different experience. It can, whatever, even if nothing else, it makes your life a little bit easier. So same sex toys as well. It just, you can use a pestle and mortar to make a chutney, but you might prefer to use a mixer grinder. You might prefer to use sex toy, and that's absolutely all right. And if you are masturbating while you are in a relationship, in fact, like it's going to add to your relationship, because there is something known as spontaneous desire and there is something known as responsive desire. Some people might experience, and all of us at in given situations might experience desire very spontaneously, like it might happen out of the blue, right? Whereas like with responsive desire, some kind of a stimulation is required in order for the person to be able to experience desire and pleasure, and therefore like be interested in sex. So if you are a responsive desire babe, in fact, like masturbating and maybe even watching ethical porn, learning more about your body, all these things are going to add to your sexual experience with your partner or your partners. So absolutely okay for you to explore your body. If nothing else, it also really helps, right? Like connecting with your body. So masturbation is a great, self-pleasure is a great technique available, a great tool that is available at your disposal to really be able to connect with your body and to also share that connection with other people. That's the second myth that I hear of. The third myth that I often hear of is that only people of a certain age can experience pleasure or should experience pleasure or are allowed to experience. We also have the Protection of Children Against Sexual Offences Act, very important as an act, right? Like child sexual abuse is a very serious issue. But in that context as well, your body literally starts producing sex hormones as soon as you hit puberty. So young people are experiencing those emotions. They might be exploring each other as well. So how can we have conversations and how can we create safe spaces for them to also be able to make informed decisions around their own bodies and sexuality? That is one age group that is really age group that is completely desexualized is older people, right? That after a certain age, why would you want to experience pleasure or think about your body in that manner? Lipstick Under My Burqa, there's a fantastic film that actually speaks about like the sexual older women, right? And very important for us to also recognize that of all ages are exploring their bodies, are trying to form a connection with their bodies. And there are also folks who might not want to do this. Like there are also asexual people who might be sex averse, might not want to experience any kind of, we need not put that kind of pressure on them to experience it just because we feel like they're of a certain age, and then desexualize people of a certain age, whether they're older or younger, and say that, okay, only this particular window in your life is when you can experience pleasure. In fact, after menopause, a lot of like menstruators hit their sexual peak. That's when they're at their horniest. So why aren't we having conversations about pleasure at that age, right? And the natural
True.
lubricant
Yeah.
from the body might go down. So, which brings me to my next myth, that there is such thing as too much lube. Okay, if you are somebody who's feeling enough by yourself, you are still allowed to bring in lube to the equation, because lube can make the experience, more fun, more comfortable, also safer. For you, it will result in less cuts and burns and all those difficulties that folks tend to face when it comes to sex. And lube is a great tool available at your disposal. It does not mean that you are somehow lacking in some way if you're using a lubricant. You're allowed to use lubes. Just the recommendation would be that use a water-based lube. And they are the most compatible with condoms. Please do not use an oil-based lube or even like coconut oil or Vaseline and things like that with condoms, because they can tear the condoms, or they wear off the latex in the condom as well, even if they don't tear them. So just make sure that you're using the right kind of lubricant. And flavored and scented lubricants are not for internal use at all, because they can cause yeast infections, can cause difficulties. So always externally. Lube is your bestie. It's absolutely okay for you to use lube. That's the next myth I would like to bust. And I think the last myth that I would like to bust is that there are only two kinds of men and women, and there is only one type they're having, which is putting penis into vagina. As crude as this sounds, those are not the only kinds of people that exist. Those are not the only kinds of sex that we are having. And if you are somebody, for instance, who enjoys watching a certain type of adult cinema, it does not mean that your sexuality has automatically changed. Your sexuality and your gender is whatever you say that it is, right? You are allowed to, right to self-determination is extremely important. And also, you're not entitled. Pride Month is just right around the corner. So please educate yourself and don't ask people. There's so many resources available online. Don't ask people intrusive questions. You would not appreciate if somebody comes and asks you, how are you having sex? Why would you go and ask somebody else, how are they having sex, right? Google it. If you're curious. So understand that there are various ways in which we'll have relationships, engage with each other, have sex, enjoy intimacy, enjoy their own bodies. We are a country that is, I'm hopeful that we are a country that embodies that kind of diversity and diverse experiences, and that needs to extend to our sexual experiences also.
So just before we wrap it up, one of the person in our chat, they asked how we relate love and sex together. I'm not sure if they are trying to how they go hand in hand, love and sex.
Yeah. Great question. I feel like for some people, love and sex are more intertwined, in the sense that one needs to exist in order for the other to happen. So maybe folks would prefer to form a connection, fall in love, and then engage with somebody. For some people, sex can be an expression of love. Maybe they don't necessarily fall in love per se, but the way that they experience love is by engaging with people with their body and through sex. There are people for whom they might be completely different things. Love and sex might not be related at all. There might be people that they love and they have sex with them. There might be people where they might have sex or not there exists love. So because love is so personal, Krati, in fact, just our audience and even between the two of us, if we were to start defining love for ourselves, it would look so different. Some people, it could be an emotion. For some people, it could be a color or a scent. It could be a person. It could be an experience. It could be a time in their life. So because love is so subjective, and as is sex is so subjective, it varies per person. Of course, those two intertwine with each other. Those two might be related to each other, but they also need to be, and that's absolutely okay. And because we believe that love and sex go hand in hand so much, it also leads to violence. There are, we hear of cases where people are coerced and they said, if you really love me, and if you really care about me, you will have sex with me, or then you'll do this for me, or then you'll send me this photo. It's also there's a very dark side to it, which needs to be recognized as well. So I'd say that each to his own. If you are somebody for whom love and sex are it's important for them to coexist, then that's your take on it. If you are for whom they might be separate things. At times they might overlap, at times they might not. That's absolutely okay as well.
Thank you so much for connecting with us. That was an insightful session, and I hope our viewers loved it. Guys, stay tuned to Her Zindagi and read our stories at herzindagi.com. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Rati. Have a nice day. Bye. Thanks everyone for
Same to
joining
you.
in.